Hello, cyberspace, and welcome to episode 6 of the Double Density podcast with your hosts, Brian and Angelo. So this episode will feature a little bit of our usual banter of technology, some paranormal stuff, some nostalgia stuff. So I figure I will leave the floor largely to you for the first section tonight, which is technology, because you'd like to talk about your personal Lord and Savior, the Apple Corporation.
I guess you can put it that way. WWDC is coming up for us. It's in a week and a half, but when this episode comes out, I think it'll be today.
So what is WWDC?
It's the Worldwide Developers Conference. They have it once a year, and it's the big thing where Apple shows off its now 4 operating systems. So that would be iOS, macOS, watchOS, and tvOS. And all 4 get shown off. All the new things come out, the features, what's going to be new this year, how they're going to copy Google, what they're going to do better than them, how they're ahead, how they're behind, everything under the sun. And
so how many of these? So these are live streamed across the world, right? So you can tune in.
Yeah. So what I usually do on those days, I usually take my lunch at noon, but on those days I take my lunch at 1, so I could live stream it to my iPad.
And how many of these have you watched roughly?
Oh, well, WWDC, I don't know when they started actually streaming this. It's been at least 4 or 5 years since the iPhone pretty much took over the market in terms of smartphones, and they started selling millions of these. Steve Jobs was still alive, right? So I guess it must have been in 2010, I think, or even 2009, they started live streaming them, but they didn't work that well, I guess. We'd have to look it up. Off the top of my head, I don't know. Maybe I could look it up while you're talking, because I don't like to listen to you.
That, or if you know the answer, you can go ahead and tweet it us at double_density, plug.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Although they'll be tweeting us in a week and a half.
Oh, that's fine. So you've sat through these. So roughly how long are these presentations?
They usually try to keep them to under 2 hours. But a few years ago in 2015, when they announced Apple Music, oh boy, did that go on. You would have enjoyed it, though. Drake was there. Did you know he's a big Apple fanboy?
I believe that. I could definitely believe that.
He was wearing an original 6 colors Apple jacket. You know, those old those leather jackets with the material sleeves?
Yes.
So
yes.
That's what, mid-90s style? He was wearing one of those.
I'm just waiting for you to go on here because.
Okay, so what else?
So roughly these are an hour.
No, they're 2 hours.
They have big things as 2 hours. So what were your favorite surprises of the past couple ones?
The last year was great because they showed how crappy the Apple Watch had been and how much they made it better with watchOS 3. That was kind of interesting. That was one of the better things of last year. They don't often release actual hardware at these things. For example, their best keynote ever was the one for the iPhone, and that wasn't at WWDC. They do announce certain things. It's more developer centric, right? So obviously it's the Worldwide Developers Conference, so it's more of their nerdy things that they announce there. But I think since Apple's become so big, they pretty much announce a lot of stuff there. And now this year they usually have a spring event, and they had nothing this spring. So this is their first keynote since October, I think, when they announced I think it's their first keynote since the iPhone launch, if I'm not mistaken. That's a while ago. So they're ready to release some products and show some things to the world. There's a huge rumor going around now that a Siri speaker is going to be announced there, sort of like what we talked about last week. And I'm pretty sure that's going to be announced. They're probably going to announce some new iPads as well. The iPads right now are kind of old in terms of technology. The 13-inch iPad Pro is 2 years old at this point, or almost 2 years old in October. And the 9.7-inch iPad, the regular size iPad, I guess, the Pro, is a year and a half old. So they kind of have to come out with something new at this point. And people are holding their breath, waiting for a 10.5-inch iPad with smaller bezels. That could be exciting. So it'd be basically a bigger screen and about the same form factor as the 9.7-inch one.
And you personally, what are you hoping that they're going to announce? Like, if there's a wish list in your heart of hearts, Like, what are you hoping that Apple will come out of?
A new iPad. I really want an iPad. I haven't bought an iPad myself since 2011. I have an iPad Mini. I think we've discussed this before, that my wife gave me as a present, and I really like it. But I can't use anybody else's iPad, or else my iPad feels really slow.
So you have iPad envy.
I do, but I'm waiting. I don't mind them taking their time, because obviously the longer you wait for these things, the better, and the more money I can put aside for it.
So what don't you want to hear from them?
What don't I want to hear from them?
Yeah, like what useless announcement would cause you to be like, oh, who cares?
Huh.
Because for me, like I'm far removed from the day-to-day goings on in Cupertino, right? So I don't really care all that much. Like I'll peruse news sites, but I don't continually keep up. It's only when I really need something that I'm sort of forced to hunt down facts and news and things like that in order to make a more informed purchase. So for me, I don't really have a horse in the new feature display, I guess.
Yeah, and whereas I follow this like some people follow sports, right? So I could not care less about who's doing anything in any sort of sporting event, but this is like, so I guess WWDC is like my Super Bowl.
Except you're at work on an iPad alone in the middle of a Friday afternoon.
Isn't that how everybody watches the Super Bowl?
Will you at least have Apple-themed nachos?
There'll be Apple-themed apple slices.
Double density.
I would like them to announce multiple audio streams on iOS. And the reason I say that, it would be nice to get a new iPad and then be able to record this podcast on it and still hear you on Hangouts at the same time, which would be kind of interesting to be able to do that and record in a more mobile area, right? Because
a truly portable solution to what's going on right now. And I think that is a smart move for them. I mean, the issues you've had going back to episode 1 with your MIDI keyboard, right? Trying to get the Thunderbolt into the
lightning thing there.
The lightning, sorry.
That and I don't know if that would fix it, but even the audio worked fine. Like I said, it was just the MIDI, but it would be nice to be able to do exactly what we're doing now. Although I do like the setup on my Mac, and it's working really great, especially with Audio Hijack, and the way it's nice having a big giant screen to be able to look at what we're talking about and actually follow along and make sure everything's actually being recorded, because nothing would be worse than recording a 50 or 100 or an hour long podcast and getting to the end and realize nothing got recorded.
Do you feel like perhaps Apple's doing this consciously, like trying to avoid having people use their iPads and iPhones in order to record, in order to steer them towards the more expensive desktops?
Absolutely not, actually. And the reason I say that is at the March, I guess, was it 2016 or 20? Yeah, I guess March 2016 event where they released the iPad Pro, they explicitly mentioned podcasters, and the whole the camera the camera kit adapter, which is essentially a Lightning to USB plug, where what I use to plug into my iPad. They announced that you can actually plug in Lightning into it as well, so it powers the iPad, and they mentioned how it's a good solution for people that want to podcast. The USB camera adapter actually would allow you to plug a USB interface like I'm using now into my Mac, and you can just plug it into the iPad and at the same time power your iPad. You were able to do that with the old camera adapter, but you couldn't power the iPad with it. Now you can, so you won't lose power and actually keep recording. So they actually gave a shout out to podcasters about this. And the thing is you can't actually record 2 independent audio streams. As soon as something else starts playing on iOS, the active audio feed cuts out. Unlike on a Mac, where right now, like I said, I'm hearing you on Hangouts, but I'm also recording myself.
So what you're seeing is perhaps a splitter in the future, or some kind of mini mixer would make a lot of sense for the portable user.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's not even that. It's just being able to manipulate audio on an iPad like you can manipulate it on a Mac.
Just imagine the possibilities, though. You could have your son call you on the one, yelling at you, and then your daughter calling you on another app and yelling at you at the same time.
Be great. Actually, I had a fun time putting them to bed tonight. My wife's out, and it's always a lot of fun putting them to bed. It's interesting to see how they act, especially as they're getting older, and they fight over things. It's like a common theme in the show. My kids fighting. They actually don't fight that much. It's just, I guess, when I'm alone with them and mommy's not here to wrangle them in.
But I feel like maybe the equation is son plus daughter plus technology equals problems.
Yeah, maybe, but and so that brings us to something that happened this week. Monday was a day off. It was, I was about to say Labor Day, but it wasn't Labor Day. What's the March, the May?
Well, it depends where you are, right? So if you're in English Canada, it's the Queen's birthday.
And here in Quebec, it's Dollar Day or something.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So we had the day off, and it was pouring rain, so we weren't going to go do any outside activities. So I finally decided, after months of debating, I bought Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Wii U. So I decided not to go spend hundreds of dollars on a Switch and get Breath of the Wild on that, even though apparently it runs a little bit better on there, and obviously it would be a fun new console. But I decided to just get it on the Wii U. And the beauty of it is now, I just went to the e-store, or the eShop as it's called on the Wii U, and I downloaded it. It took about 2 hours because it's a huge game, and the Wii U is a little slow. But instead of not being able to go out because the stores were closed and having to buy a physical copy, I could just do it, let it download while we did some chores around the house, and then the reward for that was to play Zelda with the kids. And it was kind of fun playing with them. It's fun to see the game I thought about when I was a kid, reading the instruction manual. Remember those? How fun it was to read early Nintendo instruction manuals.
So you're talking about the NES instruction manual for Legend of Zelda.
Exactly. It was full color. I'll see if we can find the scan of it online.
There's a couple. I can definitely find that. There's actually I don't know the website, but there's one project in particular that's aiming to preserve all of these old instruction manuals in the highest possible quality.
And those, especially the first party Nintendo instruction manuals, were amazing. They had little stories. There's stuff you found out in the manuals that obviously the actual game wasn't advanced enough to tell you. You found out a lot of certain things, like names of characters that you never even saw in the game. I mean, you never saw the names of the characters of from the Mario games or the Zelda games in the actual game. You read them in the manual, and the actual artwork made me imagine Zelda how it should be, other than the little pixels on the screen. Although, I guess for 1986, it was quite advanced, right?
Right. But so given that, given the fact that you just went on and on about instruction manuals, why did you choose to buy the electronic version of this?
So games don't really come with instruction manuals anymore, even if you buy a boxed game. It basically comes with a leaflet and nothing else, because the instruction manuals in the game, most games give you a tutorial as you play to figure out how to get through the game. So Zelda does that quite well. What's nice about this Zelda, I find it's not too hand-holdy. It kind of gives you a set of instructions what to do, but then it kind of just leaves you out in this world, and it's enormous. I don't know if you played Skyrim or know what Skyrim is.
I definitely know what Skyrim is.
All right.
Sorry, Elder Scrolls 5 : Skyrim.
Is it 5?
Yeah, I think it's 5.
Okay. See, I didn't know that. I just call it Skyrim.
If you're not sure whether or not it is 5, go ahead and tweet it as double_density.
Thank you. So that's the thing, right? We talk so much about so many things. I have no idea what your policy on video games is. Isn't that weird?
I am a casual game player, but an avid game watcher.
So you're on the Twitches?
I was just on Twitch before we started recording. I was watching someone play the new Friday the 13th game that recently came out. And so the thing for me is that I don't want to invest myself necessarily in a service like Twitch. Lets me hop around and see what different video games look like and sort of how they play with people who play a lot better than I could, given the time frame. I also don't have the hardware. I have one PS3, and I'm not really interested in desktop gaming right now. I mean, I've dabbled in Steam and things like that, but there hasn't been a game that's grabbed me and made me want to play since the South Park RPG a couple of years ago, Stick of Truth.
And there's a new one that just came out.
It's not out yet.
It's not out, but there's a new one coming out, right?
Yeah, it's been delayed by 2.5 years at this point, so yeah.
And what's the title again?
Fractured but Whole, I think. Let's go with that one.
Fractured but Whole, right? See, Fractured but Whole, get it? Huh?
This is what I have to deal with here. This is great.
I'm childish.
So that's coming out sometime in... Hold on. October 2017, apparently.
Okay. So that's it. I don't know much about how you game and what you do, but so in my case, I haven't really played too many games lately. I have a PS4 and I bought it and I kind of play, and sometimes I get in. It's like fits and starts, right? I started playing Fallout 4 and I enjoyed that. I played Just Cause 3, which is bonkers, but it's a lot of fun. It's basically a make your own Michael Bay movie type game.
Okay.
You're like just blowing things up. It has no substance to it, but it's a lot of fun. So, but Zelda has always been one of my favorite games, and it's kind of funny. This is the second Zelda game I buy that comes out on two consoles at the same time. One as a launch, and one as basically the last hurrah for the console. So I have Twilight Princess that I bought on the GameCube instead of getting a Wii. I never actually bought a Wii, even though I'd say of video game manufacturers, Nintendo's my favorite.
Nintendo by far, yeah, is the most consistent for me. So the only thing right now that would sway me to get a Wii U or
Not a Wii U. Do not get a Wii U at this point.
no. But I'm saying is like in theory is that or a Switch is Mario Maker, and I know if I purchase that game, I am done. Like you will not talk to me or see me for like a month.
See, yeah, and I had that on my radar for so long, and then I never ended up getting Mario Maker. But everybody says how great that game was, and that's the thing with the Wii U. There were so many games that didn't come out for it, meaning third-party games that people kind of wrote it off. But there's a handful, a good 12, 15 games on there that just make the system. If you have those 15 games, you're happy. Just some examples would be Mario Maker for one. Splatoon, I didn't play that, but it's apparently fantastic. Mario Kart 8 is amazing.
Yep.
Super Mario 3D World is so much fun. Smash Brothers is great. Yoshi's Woolly World is a lot of fun.
Is there a Kirby one for the Wii U?
I think there's a Kirby. So
I remember there was a Kirby Wii game that I was really into.
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun too. I remember. Was it Kirby's Canvas Curse possibly?
Yeah, that sounds about right. But
I think that was DS.
The thing for me is that the Switch now has a brand new name, whereas and it sold better during its first month of production than the Wii U did, right? Partially, I do believe because of the name.
That was one of the biggest blunders they ever made, was calling the Wii U, because it just confused people. People thought it was just that controller for the Wii.
Right.
And it's not. It's a whole thing. And that I have to say that gamepad's a lot of fun. Like past few nights, instead of playing it in the basement, I've been bringing the actual Wii U gamepad upstairs and just playing on the couch upstairs, relaxing and playing that way. And going back to Zelda, sorry, I started to make a point and I completely lost track of that.
That's the point of podcasting, though.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, right? So that's the it's another game, and it's funny. While it was downloading, I actually found Twilight Princess in a box, because the chore we did while we waited for the game to download was the whole family helped clear out our storage room in the basement, because we have a relatively large room in the basement that was completely filled with all kinds of stuff, and now there's so much space in there. It's great. I can like go dance in there if I really wanted to.
Please don't.
No, I won't. We got rid of a lot of baby stuff. We've sold a few things, which has been a lot of fun selling stuff online. Weird interactions with people. It's kind of awkward.
Maybe that's something we can talk about next episode.
Yeah, we can talk about selling things online. I after all these years, I finally started doing that. But so as we were waiting for that, I found Twilight Princess for the GameCube in a box. And I remember hearing that it's actually a collector's item, because so few people actually bought it on the GameCube. Because the GameCube was another, I wouldn't say a Nintendo misstep, but it was another console that didn't do as well as its predecessor.
Why do you think that is?
It's because the PS2 came out and ate its lunch. I mean, the
Right.
PS2 came out first. The GameCube and Xbox came out around the same time. And it just couldn't catch up to the momentum the PlayStation had.
I also feel like the Mario titles at launch weren't as strong as Mario 64 or Super Mario were with the prior consoles, right?
Oh no, yeah, it had. Well, there was no Mario at launch. I don't think it was.
Exactly.
It didn't launch with Mario. It was Mario Sunshine, which was fine. It got brutally hard at a few points that I just gave up on it.
But I also think it wasn't as a quote unquote traditional Mario game as everyone else was hoping for.
No, it wasn't. It was a bit weird, because he had a jetpack or a water propulsion pack. It was really weird. And the reason I bought the GameCube was for Metroid Prime. And man, was that a good game.
A lot better than Luigi's Mansion?
Yes. But I have to say, Luigi's Mansion on the 3DS is really great. That's a game that I spent a lot of time playing a couple of years ago on the 3DS.
I believe that.
Like Nintendo, they just make so many good things. When the last Zelda came out on the 3DS, Link Between Worlds, I think it was called.
Yeah.
I bought the special Zelda edition 3DS, and with all the games that came out that year, who would have thought a 3DS game would have been by far my favorite? But that was a really good Zelda game.
Well, I mean, it was basically Link to the Past plus plus. I mean, what's there to hate about that?
No, nothing. There's nothing to hate about that. And it was a bit of another, again, departure from Zelda where you don't have to go through different dungeons to get all the parts. You actually, to get all his weapons, you can actually rent weapons in that game, which is kind of a neat concept. And this one, too, you kind of get everything you need within the first few hours. And then it kind of just sets you free in the world. The only thing stopping you is that when you're going to certain places, like you kind of can get lost in this game, right? And one of the fun things about it is that if you see somewhere, you can go there. As long as you have the stamina or enough hearts or good enough weapons, you can actually reach there. So all this to say that we ended up playing a lot of Zelda on the Monday. And the kids were kind of freaking out. They really enjoyed it.
The best thing about that though is that you didn't have to get into your car and return the disc on the Tuesday morning, which is something I wanted to talk about in a segment I'd like to call things Angelo's kids will never get to experience, which is movie rental places.
That's absolutely true. The last time we rented a movie, my wife and I, we weren't even living together, and we had just rented a new movie that just came out on video called Batman Begins.
Wow. Was it on video or DVD?
On DVD, yeah.
Okay.
We are only using VHS to record shows.
Right. So that's something that, you know, this generation going forward will never know, because I spent a lot of my youth in movie rental places, both renting movies as well as video games, right? So we got a Super Nintendo one Christmas, and then a week later my mom took us to the Club International on Verdun Avenue to go rent Super Nintendo video games.
Yeah, I remember renting games. I rented Super Metroid. Didn't finish it, and then I bought it, so I had to start all over because obviously you couldn't transfer your saves because they were all saved on the actual cart itself with a battery.
Speaking of that, something that I was also interested in is that weird thing where you rent a video game with save states. So, you know, any RPG on the Super Nintendo or whatever, any cart-based RPG, and then you see another person's file and they're far ahead of you. And so you're kind of debating whether or not to erase that to make room for your own. And then sometimes you even decide to play that save state to see where it is.
Yeah, that made me think. Okay, so you used to continue the game?
I used to peer into the further save state to see where this person was, what kind of spells they had, what level their characters were at. So I was very interested in sort of seeing into the future without actually seeing into the future, right? Because now, if you want to see, there are 1,000 playthroughs for video games on YouTube, right? So you can kind of just sit down and watch someone play. Whereas back in the day, you didn't really have that luxury, right? So you kind of just if you want to see forward, this rental cart that you had kind of gave you the opportunity to do so.
You brought up something that, and you know this about me, I've mentioned it before, and this plays to my personality, that being lawful good, if I was a Dungeons and Dragons character, it made me feel terrible to actually go and look at those saved games. I didn't want to touch them. I felt it would like sully my experience, and I would delete one and just start fresh without even looking at them. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me, but I feel like maybe you don't necessarily have to automatically save over someone else's save state if you want it either, right? I feel like given the limited amount of time that you had with a game, especially if it was a popular game, though the people were planning on renting it before you get back to it, I found it interesting to be able to go in and see sort of what the future looked like, right? Because for example, a game later on, like Castlevania Symphony of the Night for PlayStation, you can go into GameFAQs.com and take a look and sort of get an idea of how to beat it, you know, and sort of what's in store in the future. Whereas for cartridge-based games, you didn't really have that luxury. So I thought it was a way to sort of get a good look at what I might be in store for.
Oh, I think you're right. I'm the one who was dumb and didn't do the right thing. There's no doubt about that. You had the right way of doing things. It was just my brain telling me, no, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong.
So did you, what was the worst rental decision you'd ever made? Because I have two.
Oh, it's so funny. Okay, well, so I can see you're practicing your remote viewing, because that was exactly what I was going to say next. Is I vividly remember renting Dragon Warrior 2 and bringing it right back after like an hour or two, realizing why the hell did I rent a really long
JRPG.
yeah, wow. Okay, let me start that over. Why did I rent a really long JRPG? Even though I didn't know they were actually called that back then. It's one of I never even understood why they would allow you to rent that type of game for a day. It should be like a disclaimer on the box. It's like you have to take a 7-day rental for this because or else you're not going to enjoy it. Because I played it and realized what a mistake. Let me just go rent something else. And I went back and rented something else. I have no idea what I rented. I don't remember that, but I vividly remember renting Dragon Warrior 2 on the NES and being really disappointed in myself.
So your idea of video game rentals is the same as the policy for airport parking. There should be a short term and a long term.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I understand you. So for me, there were two, and they were both on the Super Nintendo. So the first one, it was an adaptation of the cartoon James Bond Jr., which, if you play it as, I don't know, I was probably 6 or 7, was a truly difficult, horrible game where the first level was you in a helicopter trying to make your way towards an end goal. And so I recently went on YouTube to watch a playthrough, and I was nowhere near the end of that level as a 6 or 7-year-old. It was impossibly hard as a first level, and it was very frustrating because the difficulty level was so high that anything could kill you at any point. And so you'd have to sort of practice this level up until a space where you were able to bypass all of the tricky parts. And this was like a 7 or 8 minute level, so as a 6 or 7-year-old, it was very, very frustrating.
Sort of like the Battletoads level with the speed bikes there.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was definitely a very, very difficult level.
I never passed that level in that game.
And the second one was equally frustrating to me. So I'm beginning to see a pattern here. It was an adaptation of the Terminator 2 movie for Super Nintendo. Yeah, and it was weird because you'd play through the first level and it's the biker bar where you get your clothing, and the second level is this weird isometric racing game, but they don't tell you where you're going or you do. So automatically you're on your motorcycle and you end up being bumped by all of these trucks and all of these vans, and then you die. And so that was very, very frustrating to me. Even as an adult now, it kind of gets my blood going a little bit.
When you said "and then you die," you made me think of and then what's that line from that internet story? And then
then who was phone? then who was phone, Terminator? But yeah, it was always such a grab bag, which I think is really funny now that in hindsight. So I don't know if you did this as a kid, but I read Nintendo Power, EGM, and my friends and I would all get different magazines and trade them and read the stories and look at the stills, which gave you very little to go on a lot of the time. So what about you, Angelo? Did you read video game magazines when you were younger, or did you trade them with friends of yours?
Yeah, so I have a long history with video game magazines. Back to before Nintendo Power was actually Nintendo Power was the Nintendo newsletter. I'm sure you can find the link to that somewhere. Just look up Nintendo Power before it was Nintendo Power. But
then who was Nintendo Power?
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. Yeah. Why'd you do that to me? But yes, I did subscribe to Nintendo Power. I remember getting my first issue. I came home from school and my dad was nice enough to have picked it up out of the mailbox and put it standing up on my desk in my room. And I walked in and I saw Mega Man staring at me. It was the Mega Man 2 cover. That could be also something you put up because you should definitely look that up. That's a classic Nintendo Power cover. That was one of my first issues I got. It was, I guess, a good year after it came out, but I remember seeing the Nintendo newsletter. After that, in the late 80s, early 90s, I graduated to EGM. The first issue of EGM I got was the one with, of all things, Terminator 2 on the cover.
Oh, gosh.
And it comes full circle within a few minutes.
The worst. Did you read it? So in reading these magazines, were you ever tricked into renting or buying a video game that you then suitably regretted interacting with?
Absolutely, because back then, it seems like the barrier to entry of becoming a games journalist was not very high, even though these were printed magazines. And not to say anything, I guess not the journalists themselves, but the research wasn't really all that in there, right? They were always the same thing. They'd have like the rumors part, the previews, which always made the game sound absolutely incredible, and then the reviews. And EGM actually had really good reviews, right? They were I'd say up there with one of the better review teams where there were.
Yeah, I feel like it was EGM and then GamePro, and then my favorite Dark Horse magazine of all time, GameFan. I don't know if you ever read it.
Yeah, I read a few Game Fans. It was later. It was Game Fans kind of came out in the period where I didn't really play many games. I didn't between the SNES and the PlayStation. I didn't really touch games too much. I wasn't into it until I guess '98 when I got the first PlayStation. So it was a good 3 years of not doing anything. Like I did play a bit of the N64, but not much, and I only played because my nephew had that game, the N64.
So I was sort of speaking about GameFan because there was a crazy thread on a message board of former GameFan employees and all the shenanigans and things that they went through, and I'm going to link that in the show notes. And it's this absolutely insane thing where they so for example, whenever they got paid, they had to race to the bank in order to cash their checks because there was never enough money in the owner's account. The amount of drugs that they did while reviewing games or laying things out or writing reviews was insane. So it was a lot of fun to have the curtain pulled back all these years later with all of these older issues. So I stopped gaming at the end of the PS1 pretty much. So I'd gone from Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64, and then Nintendo 64 towards the end of the first PlayStation's life cycle, and then I kind of dropped off there. So the game fans that I were reading were the intro to Nintendo 64.
Okay, so yeah, so you had so I had a very different thing, right? I started with the ColecoVision Atom, of all things, because I was born way before you. And then I got my friend, my neighbor got an NES in, I guess, 86, and we got Zelda. He got Zelda right away, and we played that a lot, Zelda 2. And then I got an NES in 1989 for my birthday. I guess that was my 12th birthday. With my first NES game was Master Blaster.
Oh, that's a really fun game.
That's an amazing game, actually, yeah. And then after that, I got a Genesis. Because, Genesis what Nintendo don't, or what Genesis...
Genesis does what Nintendo don't.
Yeah, I don't even know my sayings anymore. But that was great. But then I realized the SNES had really good games because my heart was still with Nintendo, even though I did like Sonic and stuff. Nintendo made really good. There's some really crappy games on the Genesis as well, like Zelda. Sega sort of just threw stuff out there. Like Altered Beast, if it wasn't in the arcade where it was a quarter eating machine, with unlimited continuous, it was pretty much a joke, right? That game.
Well, also graphically, it was a joke compared to its arcade counterpart.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, they used to tout it as an arcade 16-bit thing. I remember the first time I saw the Genesis was in the Consumer's Distributing catalog. I was wondering what the hell it was. My friend had the TurboGrafx 16. That was kind of cool.
Very expensive though, even for its time.
Yeah, and it had the weird game cards were kind of bizarre.
Yeah, so it's either CDs or carts depending on what the game was.
There were very few CDs though, and nobody bought the CD player. The CD player was really expensive.
Yeah, and that's why each game is pretty much worth almost $200 there right now on the secondary market.
Yeah, because nobody bought them. And then there was the SNES though. That's probably my favorite system by far.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that one. And I think that so I guess your parents were supportive in your video gaming habits.
Yeah, I mean, it did take a lot for me to get a video game, though. They weren't just going to buy me a game every time. It was always like a birthday present, Christmas present. I do remember, I don't know if this is a created memory, sort of like a lot of people do with a lot of things, but I remember bugging my dad to go get Super Mario Brothers 3, but he just couldn't he wasn't finishing mowing the damn lawn. But we drove to Toys R Us, took that little ticket from the thing and paid for it, and then went to the guy behind the booth who gave me my Super Mario Brothers 3, and then I read the instruction manual on the way home, and then got to play for a bit. And that's a vivid memory of buying a game. That, and then another game I remember clearly buying and overpaying for was Outrun on the Genesis.
Oof.
That game cost $90. Games were so expensive back then. $90 in 1993 is a lot of money.
Yes.
But yeah, so that, and then after I entered my blue period when I didn't play any games, but then I got a PlayStation. I was one of the first people. I was one of the lucky few who got a PS2 the day it came out, and it actually came out on my birthday. And I was lucky enough to get it because I worked at a store that sold them. So
This seems like a recurring theme where you get things on the day they come out.
uh, it's more of a remembering that when that does happen, because I often don't get things the day they come out. But the PlayStation was an exception. I spent a lot of money on that stupid thing. I should have, if I could go back to 2000, I would say, the money you're spending on that PlayStation, buy Apple stock. It was like $4.
I do enjoy how you would have told your younger self to be fiscally responsible.
I really would. Like I consider myself fiscally responsible now, but back then I was not. But I didn't really need to be, right? I lived at home. I had a job that all the proceeds just went to fuel my video games at that point. I bought like everything for the PS2. Oh yeah, before that though, I bought the Dreamcast because it was heavily discounted. It was like $50 at one point.
Wow, okay. And what were your favorite games on there?
Soul Calibur was fantastic.
Did you play any Crazy Taxi? That was one of my favorites.
I loved Crazy Taxi as well. That was a really good game too. There's so many. It's so fun to go down memory lane, and that's another. I found my stash of Dreamcast games too when we cleaned out that back room, and the Dreamcast was funny because the games were easily pirated, and back then I had no qualms about my friends giving me a bunch of games.
So you used to trade off with each other.
Well, I had a friend of mine who basically, I think he had like every game burned, and he didn't mind giving them away. He's just like, just buy me the discs you want me to put them on, and I'll give them to you.
Did you ever play Seaman?
I actually never played Seaman. That was the one where you can talk to somebody, right?
Yeah, you could talk to the weird sea creature on screen a lot.
Sega's always done weird stuff with their peripherals, haven't they?
Yeah, it's always been this strange kind of Seaman in particular was an odd one, and we'll throw a link down to the video of a playthrough or something. But yeah, it's definitely one of these weird games. Like it's almost analogous to, I used to play Endless Ocean for the Wii, which had sort of like missions, but it was a lot more fun to just swim around for hours discovering fish for no reason.
Oh, that's fun. So this comes back to Zelda Breath of the Wild. I played while I was home today because of some work being done on the house, and I basically spent the whole time just moving around Zelda the world and just enjoying what it looks like, looking at fish, catching butterflies and lizards and frogs, because then you cook them and make elixirs out of them. But climbing mountains, it's just a beautiful game, even on the Wii U.
So what you're saying is that you can see yourself playing this all the way through till whenever it ends.
Oh yeah, the Zelda games, I don't think I've ever given up on a Zelda game that I've started. I haven't played all of them though, I have to say. I never played Skyward Sword because I didn't have a Wii, and I haven't bought it on the Wii U actually. But I did play through most of them. I played through the 2 on the GameCube. I really enjoyed those quite a bit, and I've played on the ones on the DS and the 3DS, and
and also Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time.
I never played those 2.
So basically what you're saying is that you've played through half of the Zelda offerings out there and you've beaten them. So you are the Iron Man of Zelda games with an asterisk, and the asterisk being you've only played half of them.
Well, I haven't played arguably the one that people say is the best one.
Have you played the Game Boy one?
Which Game Boy one?
The first one.
No.
Okay. So I'm beginning to see a pattern here where you, sir, are a charlatan of Zelda games.
That's not true. Come on.
You literally said I've beaten every Zelda game I've played, but then you've only played like 4.
Well, no, I've beaten every one I've played. So I played Zelda 1, Zelda 2. I don't know. Maybe I didn't beat Zelda.
Zelda 8, Zelda 9. You've never beaten Link to the Past before, really?
No, that's Zelda. No, that's Zelda 3.
Oh, right. You're saying Zelda 2, right? The side
Zelda 2 was the weird evil stepchild of the Zelda franchise.
Right. Or at the end, you have to fight a shadow version of yourself.
And Zelda 2 is actually a direct sequel, whereas the other Zeldas are not. The timeline for Zelda is the most crazy thing out there in video games.
There's a great book by Dark Horse, actually, that kind of breaks down the mythology, a lot of it. And it's really, really cool. And then it gets into all the video games. And I read it a little while ago. And it's super fun.
Is that the Hyrule Companion?
Exactly, yeah. And there's a new one out there, too, that's a red cover. And I can't remember what its name is. But if you're interested in learning more about Zelda, that's definitely a great place to start if you're a little confused about where the timeline goes, as well as which timeline these games fall into, which is another thing entirely.
Well, I actually have a copy of it on my Wii U because a mutual friend of ours gave me her download code for it because she had the actual book and she didn't need it, so she gave it to me.
So you should read it.
I should. It's just weird reading on a Wii U.
You should read all about all of the games that you never actually played or beat.
Yeah, thanks. You're mean.
Double Density presents the sounds of your youth. Double Density. Welcome back to the Double Density podcast. And I recently shared a video with you, Angelo, of one of my heroes. I don't actually have heroes, but if you were to tell me, Brian, please list off the people you admire, he'd be high on the list. And that man would be Snake Plissken himself, Kurt Russell.
I was about to say, is it Snake Plissken?
Yeah. And so actor Kurt Russell was recently on a BBC One program because he's in the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And the host actually dug up some really interesting information in that Kurt Russell was one of the civilian pilots who actually made a report on the 1997 Phoenix Lights.
So I watched the video and I wasn't quite sure of why they were bringing that up and did he know ahead of time? Like, had he figured out that Kurt Russell was that pilot, or did Kurt Russell reveal it on there because that's what they were talking about?
In a lot of these instances, what happens is that some research is done, and I guess this was a fun fact to bring up during the show. So some of the pre-show researching done, Kurt or someone representing Kurt probably let that one drop. So it was a lot of a researcher on the show's end picking up the pieces and informing the host of this, getting their questions ready.
It was really well done how they kind of talked about it and revealed slowly that he was a pilot that I guess called in the UFO that night.
And that is literally a UFO, as an unknown flying object, not the classical term of flying saucer UFO, but a little UFO, which I think is an important distinction to make in the way that he explains himself, right?
Yeah, he sounded really cogent and understanding about what he's talking about, and that it's when people see lights in the sky that they can't explain, or a physical object they can't explain, it's a UFO. It's exactly that. It's an unidentified flying object. The problem now is that word actually means something else, and that it's, as soon as they hear it, it's an alien. It's nothing. It's from outer space. It's not from Earth or whatever. But it's not. It's what Kurt Russell said he saw. He didn't know what it was. It was kind of almost in the way of the plane, right? He made it sound like it was right over the runway.
Yeah, he was saying that there are these 6 lights that were kind of in the way, and he didn't know what to do, and the radar operator wasn't picking up these lights on their radar.
And they didn't really go into this in the video, but do you think it was the flares, that the famous flares from that night, or was that at a different time?
I absolutely believe it was the flares, because the way that the story was construed on the program, it sounded as though that all of these details were matching up, especially at the end when Kurt was watching years later. I guess his wife, Goldie, was watching some kind of report, and he sort of slowly pieced together that he had been a part of that incident after having watched this special.
And that's the interesting thing with the whole Phoenix Lights story, is that that part of it now is established, right? But it's the stuff that happened before that people are kind of not sure. Like, even true UFO believers admit, if that's the right word, that the thing that was filmed so clearly is clearly flares from a U.S. Army base, right? Everybody pretty much agrees on that. It's what happened before where the debate happens, in that people think it was this triangular giant craft that blocked out the stars, right?
Right.
The whole Phoenix Lights thing is kind of like played out at this point, but it's really fun to hear that a celebrity, somebody everybody knows who's now in a movie about space, saw something that a lot of people misconstrue as an alien aircraft.
Yeah, and I think there's been a long history of this sort of thing, right, where things are easily explainable, and then people go looking for more. So, for example, most famously, I guess, would be Project Blue Book, which is a compendium of reported sightings to the U.S. government from 1952 to 1970. And so there were 12,618 reports during that time frame, during those 18 years. And of that, 718 of them could not be clearly identified, but, quote unquote, to quote them, did not defy the science or technology of the time. So of 12,618, less than 10% of them were not clearly identifiable, but probably had a really good reason behind them.
And that's pretty much the common thing, right? 5 to 10% of things that people admit seeing are the ones that don't become identified, and they just remain unidentified. And a lot of people like to put on other meaning to that, making them think that it's something crazy, but it's usually probably just military aircraft that they can't describe or is classified or anything like that. It's never anything that, like they say, defies the science of the time. The problem is that a lot of these people that witness it think it does, right? They think it takes off super fast, basically because of the way they perceive it, but or an angle that they view it at. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something out of this world, right?
I think the most infamous of these things would be the Roswell crash, I guess, of 1947.
Yeah, because then finally, after 50 years, the government, or was it 40 years, they declassified what was called Project Mogul. Now, of course, even though they declassified it and said it was exactly that, and that's why they covered it up, so to speak, people weren't satisfied, right? The ones that want to believe that there were bodies recovered from an alien craft that had funny markings on it and all that will not believe that it's Project Mogul, whether that's the truth or not.
That is the one incident which I'm willing to sort of give any leeway to alternate theories beyond Project Mogul, because of the fact that the government itself reversed itself on what it actually recovered in early July 1947. So to that, I feel like the flip-flopping a lot of the time does create a problematic narrative, and I think that's the most famous example of all of these incidents. And so in that instance, I'm willing to sort of believe that maybe there was stuff beyond Project Mogul that they still cannot talk about necessarily, or don't want to talk about or divulge, and I get that. But the majority of the time, a lot of these sightings are really just different optical illusions, or the number of people who report things like shooting stars as UFOs is incredible.
Well, so in preparation for today, as I was, as I mentioned, there was work being done in my house, so there's people, there were roofers here, so I was waiting for them to get done so I could go talk to them and see what was up. I had a few minutes to kill, and I put on a show on Netflix called Unsealed Alien Files, and it's pretty terrible. It's really low budget, and it's all full of true believers, and it's really cheesily made. It's not self-aware at all. I can't even describe it. Anyway, they had a thing talking about how there was a truck with what seemed like a UFO on its flatbed going through town, and all these people were calling in saying it looks like a spaceship. I saw a spaceship, and they had actual 911 calls of people reporting this spaceship. It ended up being an actual experimental drone from the U.S. military, but it just goes to show how quickly stuff escalates when people don't understand the thing they're seeing. It's like, I don't know if you've ever seen a blimp in the sky.
I have.
You don't see blimps that often, and every time I see one, it takes me a few seconds to recognize what it is. So you can only imagine when, if you happen to see like a stealth fighter or a stealth bomber fly over for whatever reason, not that we'd see that here because that would be a major problem if we saw that, because we don't have stealth bombers in Canada, right? It would be a strange thing to see because your mind's not used to seeing that. And those things look really alien, right? So to speak. I keep saying right. Those things look really alien.
And I mean, sort of pursuant to that, look at the SR-71 Blackbird military aircraft, right? So, this was created in the mid-60s, and its shape was very odd, and it did make a lot of noise. And just like the U-2 spy plane, odd tech that was tested out on U.S. grounds before being deployed into other regions of the world, and a lot of people reported these two specific airplanes as aliens because of the way that they moved and the fact that they weren't conventional in their approach and in their sounds.
Well, the episode of that show I was talking about that I watched, they mentioned that aircraft, and they attribute what it was able to do to alien technology discovered at Roswell.
So my theory from a couple of episodes still exists.
Yeah, the Philip Corso, is that his name? He wrote the book on
Philip
that.
J. Corso, The Day After Roswell, I think.
Yeah, so he talked about how that was taken from there. The Kevlar was invented from that. A whole bunch of stuff, and you've talked about this before. It's something that you actually really like to talk about.
I think it's fun to talk about, but I also think the funny thing too is that I think that something that we all need to not necessarily pay attention to, remember, but the idea that a lot of these people like Philip J. Corso get into fights with other UFO researchers about things like Roswell.
That really entertains me, actually, when those people start fighting about one ridiculous theory over another. I think this happens with the MJ-12 documents, where a lot of UFO researchers don't believe they're real, but a few of them are adamant about it.
So Stanton Friedman at one point did believe that those were authentic documents.
I thought he still did.
Kevin J. Randall doesn't believe that they are. So one of the guys who was concentrated on Roswell does not believe that those are actual verifiable documents.
Yeah, and Stanton Friedman, I think, still does.
Yeah, he still does, and he still asserts that. And speaking of Philip J. Corso, your friend and mine, Dr. Stephen Greer, posthumously, so this came out a couple of years ago, I don't know if you know this, claimed that Corso met extraterrestrials.
Oh, that's new.
So I love the idea of taking the names of the dead and associating them with things that you obviously cannot prove because they're dead.
Oh, okay, so he has no proof of this. That's a shocker.
No, he just brought this up during the middle of a talk.
Yeah, okay, so it's fine.
And it's funny that Philip J. Corso, in his own words, never thought to mention, meeting aliens during the course of his investigations and travels.
Look, that was not as important as the SR-71 Blackbird.
Clearly not. But, it's funny to sort of like pay attention to the squabbling. So, for example, I don't know if you heard about this one. So researcher Nick Redfern thinks that Roswell was a crashed Japanese balloon filled with prisoners.
Really? When did he mention this? I like Nick Redford.
So this is like a new one now that he's mentioned.
Oh, I think, yeah. Okay, I think I downloaded a show about that recently. I haven't listened to it yet. I like that guy, though. He's fun. He writes a lot of books.
He's fun,
like
but he's also kind of crazy.
I don't know if he's actually crazy. I think he just...
Or he plays a persona.
Yeah, I think he likes this stuff. I think he believes it more than we do. But he really likes this stuff because I haven't read any of his books, okay, to be honest, but I've seen a lot of his books online. They're a bit like, he's all over the place, right? He doesn't just concentrate on one part of the paranormal. He's like into everything. He just throws everything at the wall.
Well, he does things like cryptozoology and ufology, and so he does things about things like Bigfoot and the Men in Black and Roswell.
And he was in an episode of that Penn and Teller show.
Bullshit.
Yes, but we're not allowed saying that on the air.
Oh, it's the name of a title. We can say that. That's fine.
I guess you might have to bleep it.
But yeah, I agree that I feel like he's one of those people who has a niche that he exploits to a certain amount of acclaim. I mean, he's doing what he's doing in order to keep living, right? So
he writes a lot of books. If anything, I haven't read them, so I have no idea how well edited they are, how well written they are, because a lot of times in that space, there are a lot of self-published books, and they're pretty terrible.
A lot of vanity publishing that happens.
I have a couple of books that are not self-published, and one of the more famous UFO books, I kind of put it up on my Kindle again yesterday, or my iPad Kindle app. Back to technology there. Is that Leslie Kean, I think she pronounced her name Kane, Leslie Kane book. And funny enough, I had forgotten about this, but the foreword of the book is by none other than John Podesta.
So the man behind Pizzagate.
And all the his trouble with email passwords.
Right. So the man who is infamous for creating and maintaining Pizzagate wrote the foreword to this book.
And I didn't realize that the guy who ran the Hillary campaign was such a huge proponent of I was gonna say exposure of disclosure.
I mean, it is exposure of a certain kind after a while, right?
I guess. But he was when he was in the White House with, I guess he was there with Clinton and Obama, right?
I think both, yeah.
He was really looking into this, but just to think, if somebody who worked in so close to the highest level of office in the U.S. doesn't know if the U.S. has any UFOs hidden away somewhere, does that mean there aren't any, or is it that well kept of a secret, even though secrets seem to be really hard to keep these days,
So
especially in the US?
Tangential to this, right? So take former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. So during, Jimmy Carter is one of the few U.S. presidents to go on record saying he had seen a UFO, he had a UFO incident. And during the campaign trail, he said, when I get into power, I will do all that I can in order to disclose and divulge everything having to do with extraterrestrial life. As soon as he gets into power and he's questioned about it, as he ascends to the office of the president, he doesn't want to talk about it anymore.
So what does that mean? Does it mean that he felt that it would make him look less presidential, or does it mean that he did find something out and he really doesn't want to tell people because it's worse than he thought it was going to be?
So I'm of three minds, not only two but three. So it's the first you mentioned, either any sort of talking about UFOs is equated to fluff and therefore not presidential. The second scenario is that he himself believes in these things and he has revealed before him the horrors and the unspeakable truth hidden behind closed doors, and he cannot bring this to the American people properly. Or thirdly, there's nothing there and there's nothing to say, and he looks like a fool if he turns around and says there's nothing.
I think probably it's number 3.
In my heart of hearts, I wish it were number 2, but I'm going with number 3 on this one.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite book on ufology?
The Leslie Kean book was actually quite good. She does take a few shots at people like us that don't really believe too much into this. And a lot of the book has to do with first-hand accounts from aircraft pilots, generals, all kinds of different people. And the thing with accounts like that is that you're still dealing with the human brain, and with all its own fallibility it has and all the mistakes we can make, it's still regular people. One of the cases, I can't remember if they discussed in the book, but the Rendlesham Forest case, that's a famous one. I think we could devote a whole episode to that. But that case has a lot of problems, especially stuff that came out after.
I think that Nick Pope actually put out a book about that 2 years ago.
And Nick Pope's another one. We're kind of name dropping a lot tonight, and I guess maybe one of these days we'll do a whole episode about the personalities in ufology.
Yeah, so he put out a book in 2014 called Encounter in Rendlesham Forest.
And yeah, that whole thing I think could be easily explained, but you get a lot of people angry when you say that, so let's not say that.
Right. Okay, so that's your choice for books. For me, there's 2 different ones. One is mostly for the quote-unquote lulz, and the other one is actually factually interesting. So the first one is Jim Mars's Alien Agenda, where Jim Mars just basically throws...
Jim Mars, so cheese.
Everything he can and sees what sticks. So he talks about, all of these different kinds of UFOs and the chupacabras and 2012 and all this thing, because the book was written in the mid-90s. So he throws out kind of a whole smorgasbord of paranormal occurrences under the umbrella of aliens are part of everything that I mentioned. And so it's kind of interesting and fun to read all of these different things being propagated. And, in hindsight, 20 years later, it's fun to read and be like, well, he was wrong about all of this. And then for me, the one that I actually think is really interesting is a book by Annie Jacobson that was put out in 2012 called Area 51, an uncensored history of America's top secret military base, which actually factually describes what happens there and demystifies a lot of the alien angle with, this is a testing facility. Of course, top secret things happen, and this is why they happen. And that's why a lot of the reports that you see in the area don't actually correlate to alien aircraft when you consider, things like the SR-71 and the UT spy plane.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like when people write things that are grounded in reality. And that's my criticism of the Leslie Kean book, is that she's a little woo in her own right. I saw her on Colbert when the book came out. Pre Late Show Colbert. It was more on the Colbert Report. And it was pretty funny to see their interaction. I just looked her up on Google, and under people also search for Nick Pope is there. Alan Clemens, who I don't know who that is. But next to those two, Tom DeLonge.
Yeah, I could go on and on about former Blink-182 or Tom DeLonge, but I will reserve that for another episode.
Yeah, and the reason I can remember the title of the Leslie Kean book is because it's a pretty boring title. It's UFOs. Generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record.
Oh, it sounds more like a leather-bound report than an actual book almost, right? So in summation, Kurt Russell, keep checking the skies, right, Angelo?
Yeah, I like to look at the sky. It's pretty, but I never saw a UFO.
Have you seen a shooting star, though?
I have. Actually, I've seen at the last music festival I went to while the, was it Smashing Pumpkins were playing or Our Lady Peace? One or the other was playing.
Are you talking about one of the somersaults over here?
Yeah, somersault. I saw a fireball, like a meteor like breaking up. It was really cool.
Not a UFO, though.
Not a UFO, though. Yeah, no, I've never seen a UFO, but I've seen a fireball a few times, actually. It's kind of cool to see that in the sky.
So we're both at 0. So by the end of the year, I hope we both have a UFO incident, perhaps even together.
Maybe. We keep talking about this. We'll see what happens, huh?
I'll see you on your back deck.
All right. Oh, that sounds wrong.
Double Density. Welcome back to the Double Density podcast, and this is the end of episode 6. So we've been at this for a month now, Angelo. How do you feel about the podcasting lifestyle?
So I think we've been doing great with these episodes. We're kind of coming into our own with our format, trying to figure out where we're going with this. But we're settling in on something that works with our tech talk and our nostalgic look backs and our talking about the paranormal.
And as always, if you've enjoyed hearing us talk about these things, we'd love to hear from you. You can hit us up on Twitter. So that's at double_density. And you can also search for us on Facebook, either by typing in Double Density or facebook.com/Double Density Podcast, one word. We're also on Instagram at Double Density Podcast, one word. And Angelo, could you do us a favor and have your wife give us a report card of our progress?
I'll ask her. I don't know if she listened to the latest episode yet or the episode before that. She is a very busy person. I don't think the kids in her classroom would appreciate her listening to podcasts as she works like I do.
But you never know. You never know is what you're saying here.
I will definitely ask her. She's actually enjoying the show. She thinks you do a really great job.
And I think you're progressing astoundingly well. I would give you a B+ or A- just to have you work on it some more. Just because, not even due to anything factual.
Well, you're really sweet, Brian. Thank you.
So tune in next week as we discuss Bigfoot fact or delicious meal. This has been episode 6 of the Double Density Podcast, and you should tune in next week.
See ya.
Oh, bye.